Hello? Hello? Hi everyone. We're about to start. So, good afternoon everyone. I'm Robert. Today I'll be presenting the playbook that we at Game Lounge used to migrate from a BI tool that used to serve us for over 5 years. And hopefully by the end of it, I'll make a task that looks so daunting, hopefully somewhat a bit less daunting, right? To give you some context, I'm Robert. I'm currently a senior data architect at Game Lounge. And at Game Lounge, we're a top affiliate marketing company in the iGaming industry. For those of you who do not know what the iGaming industry is, it's basically the online space for casinos, sports books, so on and so forth. So, in a nutshell, we have websites in multiple geographics, and we try to rank first on Google, and if people register through us, we get referral on who ends up converting. So, as you can imagine, as a data team, although we're relatively small, we're a data team composed of 8 people to a company that is 180 people large. We only serve internal teams, whether it being SEO, acquisition, CRM, so on and so forth. That's where the data team comes in. So just to visually explain it a bit, this is one of our sites. Imagine it as if it's the booking.com but for casinos, right? If you click on a site and you end up converting, you get redirected. If you actually convert, that's where we actually make money. So before I'll jump into the trenches of how we handle the migration, I would like to start with a bit of an analogy regarding the Great Fire of London. And in 1666, a small fire broke out in a bakery in Pudding Lane, which over 4 days took over 13,000 homes, 87 churches, and most of the medieval city at the time. It was one of the most catastrophic urban disasters in British history, and what's interesting was that while the damage was severe, it also became a turning point for London as a city, because this fire forced city planners and leaders and engineers to rethink London's entire layout, leading to improved urban design, better sanitation, so on and so forth. So despite the devastation at the time, it became the foundation for a more resilient and better planned city, right? Now, I'm by no ways and means comparing a BI tool migration to a city fire, right? But somewhat, some of the principles are the same. Because over time, our BI ecosystem had become a bit of a sprawl containing hundreds of dashboards that might be unused, duplicated, with no sense of ownership. And it was working, but it wasn't necessarily sustainable, right? So, like the Great Fire of London, sorry, our migration gave us a purpose to revisit what we were doing wrong, and it also gave us the opportunity to start fresh in a more scalable and future-ready way. So, to give you some context, why did it seem like it was time to move on from our previous BI tool? The tipping point really and truly came from when stakeholders, so our internal teams, were constantly coming to us with potential mishaps, right? And we were receiving continuous feedback that ended up being into a lot of ad hoc requests, small fixes, and as a data team, instead of innovating and trying to fulfill what's actually needed for the business, we became butlers of other teams, fixing what wasn't working, so on and so forth, which was going against the mantra of self-service analytics, right? And at the same time, we noticed that our BI platform provider was shifting a bit of their focus, discontinuing key support services such as dedicated engineering support, and that's why we also felt that the stakeholder feedback is actually valid, because it was somewhat impacting us as the data team as well. So that's when we seriously started considering the possibility of migration. So what did we ended up looking for and eventually finding within Omni. Part of the bottlenecks that I mentioned were about flexibility, speed, and also having a lower technical barrier to entry. Because if you have a BI tool and you're trying to advocate for self-service analytics, but eventually it leads to a lot of custom syntax and stuff like that, it's kind of defeating the purpose for non-dev related teams, right? So now that I've told you where we are, I'm going to go a bit back on how we actually handled the migration itself. But before doing that, I would like to visualize a bit more the problem. So in a nutshell, over the course of multiple years on our previous BI tool, as you can see, we started gaining a lot of unused dashboards which weren't relevant to the business anymore. Which was also an eye-opening factor for the data team. This wasn't just an issue because of the BI tool that we were using, right? But usage rates were dropping. And one thing I mentioned as well is custom syntaxing. If we're advocating for self-service analytics, but non-technical teams are finding it really difficult to create a simple dimension or a measure, then it's kind of defeating the purpose of what should be self-service analytics, right? So to kick things off before actually jumping into a migration, right, we needed to do a bit of an audit and the discovery of what we actually have. And it was relatively straightforward. So we didn't use any fancy stuff. We started with a Google form and we made it mandatory. So all heads of departments alongside their core team members needed to answer what they're actually using, whether they're still using something and why. If they're not using something, they don't need to list it out because that would instantly flag the opportunity for an archival, right? Aside from that, we also cross-referenced the feedback that we received from this one-time survey with our usage metrics from our previous BI tool so that we could then kind of cross-reference with what's actually being used and not. So in a nutshell, this is the actual Google form that we rolled out. So it's as simple as explaining why we're doing this. We just needed them to list the links of the dashboards that they use. So there was nothing necessarily fancy about this. And what this form helped us eventually do is to start scoping what requires migration and what doesn't. Eventually, this took us into a position where we could determine which dashboards should actually be migrated. Once again, this is a Google sheet, nothing too fancy. But as you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, we flagged whether to keep it or not. So to explain a bit what you're seeing here, on the left-hand side, you have the actual dashboard titles and their IDs. And then on the right-hand side, whether they were picked up in the survey or not. The three penultimate columns at the very far right, I blurred out the names. Those are key users in our company, to make sure that those aren't impacted if they do not, if they forgot to list something out in the form, right? One thing that was interesting in our findings, if we had to fully base this on historical views, we would have taken the top X dashboards and that's about it, right? But if we go at the very bottom of the list, we're gonna see that some dashboards were flagged to be kept, even if the historical view count over the last couple of weeks or months was relatively low. So that's why an audit is actually needed. But you might ask me, Rob, how did you actually handle the timeline and the structure of something that's so massive? Like, you used the previous BI tool for 4 to 5 years, right? And in a nutshell, this is how we segmented the team. We're a data team of 8 people, just to reiterate. We have 2 data engineers, 2 people in the BI pillar, 1 product manager, and then we have a data architect and a data scientist. And the way we split it was that our data engineers, rather than focusing on pipelines and stuff like that, they lended a hand on actually migrating the semantic layer to make sure that we have production-ready topics, or as other tools call it, models. And eventually the BI team handled the actual rebuild of our dashboards. But it wasn't just a rebuild. We made sure that we were overhauling as we go. And finally, as most PMs and POs do, we had someone constantly tapping us on the back to make sure that we're prioritizing the most important stuff first. So if we had to visualize this in a bit of a timeline, this is literally how I would say that we've tackled it. So roughly in August 2024, we were going back with stakeholders, constant back and forth to understand why our current BI tool is not working. And eventually, once we, as the data team, were convinced that a migration might be imminent, after we sold it to our team as well, we started off with the audit and planning, and we then carried our way into the actual platform setup, which in this case for us it was Omni. I think it would make sense to start with core dashboards first, and these core dashboards are the ones that you cannot live without. So if you have a deadline by when you need to migrate to, please start with these first, because if you do not finalize any of the secondary dashboards, those can sort of wait. But one thing we also kept in mind while doing this migration is to have an element for training and eventually signing off, because this wasn't just our migration. This is going to impact the whole 180 employees at the company, right? And eventually, we also sunset the tool. But with any migration, there's also that added layer of questions like, are we going to be covered if something goes south? What are we actually going to do if something breaks or something, right? And what we did in liaison while also working on the new platform, we created a one-time script which pretty much backed up our entire instance of our previous BI platform. And again, this is nothing that's too fancy. I'll show you some screenshots from our drive soon. We just extracted all of our dashboards in PDF format so we can visually cross-reference with it if we need to. And then we also collected some CSV metadata to understand which data sets, which fields these dashboards are using. So if we're unsure once we migrate onto the new platform, we can cross-reference with that. So to make this a bit more visual, as you can see, these are all of the different backups on different dates that we took from the previous BI tool. This was a localized script running on one of our laptops, so it wasn't something that, again, was too fancy that instantly uploads to Google Drive. But we create a new folder for every backup, and this is what the CSV look like. So I'm not expecting you to understand this, not even I do, but we have the dashboard IDs on the left-hand side, and then on the right-hand side, as you can see, that's where we have the fields that were being used, which tables, so on and so forth. So once again, if we required cross-referencing, we would be in a position to do so. In a slightly more visual manner, these are the PDF exports, right? So these were our actual dashboards that were being used by our users. And once again, we saved these just to know how they looked like, how it was visualized, so on and so forth. Having said that, the rebuild mindset brought a fresh perspective to us as the game launch data team, right? We needed to make sure that intrinsically when we're focusing on value rather than volume. As you can see, or as you saw, there were hundreds of unused dashboards on our previous platform, so we wanted to make sure that that doesn't end up being the case once again. So instead of cloning from one platform to another, we rebuilt in a slightly smarter way by making sure that visualizations are more up to standard, and by ensuring that from a user experience perspective, there's also, for example, less clicks when using a dashboard. And we also took this opportunity to do a bit of a semantic layer overhaul. And by this I mean that most of you who potentially work on a semantic layer, there's stuff that gets cluttered over the years, joins that no longer make sense, or views that are no longer used, right? So we made sure not to migrate anything that is actually clutter. With that said, mentioning semantic layers, if you're familiar with Looker semantic layer, which I still believe is a good semantic layer, I would highly recommend you guys looking at Omni semantic layer, which provides an added layer for both engineers and analysts without necessarily having the need to be super technical about it. So that was also a very nice value add for us as the tech team. Going into it, in the actual migration, after doing this audit over the 4 years, we identified that we do not necessarily have to migrate 800 dashboards, because after doing the survey, actually looking at usage rates and what's necessarily obsolete, we ended up flagging that out of those 800s, slightly over 100 are the ones that were actually deriving value to our team. So 700 dashboards of sprawl over 4 years, that's something. And this is the eye-opening factor that I mentioned before. This also gave the opportunity for the data team to kind of take a long, hard look at the mirror to start thinking whether we should take every task or whether we should start prioritizing and understanding the value behind the requests that are flowing in. Aside from that, then there's also some other stuff related to governance and structure, for example. And by these, I mean that we redesigned our role-based access, we launched some initiatives related to dashboard verifications, and we also overhauled our dashboarding standards. For those of you who do not know what dashboard verifications are, basically we launched this initiative where if you're self-serving, so if you're someone from sales, from the content team, and you'd like to bring your own dashboard to the company, you can. We're not going to restrict you to do that, but we as the data team have to vet it. So we make sure that we're not passing dashboards to everyone. You're coming up with your own KPIs and they are, unstructured KPIs that no one uses. So that was also an opportunity that Omni allows you to do. And this way, we started creating a platform that will scale with us. When it comes to group-based permissions, we basically have a viewer and a user permission for every single role. So we're not expecting everyone to do self-serve, right? You're going to have a large portion of your users who are just looking at data. Maybe they'll apply a filter or two, and that's about it. They have no interest in actually self-serving or exploring their data sets on their own. So the way we did it is we cluster those users. As you can see, there's the same role written twice, one as a user and one as a viewer. And this also gave us the possibility to start segregating teams within the company. We do have some sensitive data that not everyone can preview, and by utilizing these groups, we made sure that we're restricting users when it comes to specific fields or queries, for example. One thing you have to do when doing a migration is ensuring that you're maintaining uptime, right? It's not a switch. You switch on one, you turn off the other. It has to be a gradual process until you get there. So both our BI platforms, our old one and the new one, ran in parallel. But you have to be very, very careful with this because topic drift or model drift is imminent. If you're writing new stuff on the old platform while you're migrating to the new one, that's where the drift becomes inevitable, right? So one way we decided to do it as the data team, hey, we're not going to take new requests on the old platform. If it requires bug fixing, quick fixes, so on and so forth, yes, we'll do that, and we'll raise it with the rest of the engineers. So we know that we would need to flag that onto the new platform as well, but no new features. This was a short term of a month and a half, and most stakeholders understand. And I think if you're actually considering a migration, this is one thing to keep in mind, because if you have one engineer maintaining your old platform and another one trying to migrate the other one, you're not going to match when it comes to numbers. And yes, we started redirecting users from our old platform to the new one after we vetted it with the actual team members of that team. So once we were happy with what we're seeing as the data team, that's when we started onboarding one team after another. One thing we did, as I've showcased in the timeline of our migration, was allocating time for training. So we did department-wide workshops and team-specific training decks, and we also opened a dedicated Slack channel where everyone in the company who's utilizing our new BI platform, Omni, can send a message, because if there are similar questions, we don't have to address the same question once. You can quickly skim through the channel, you will have that. If someone's asking a similar one, you can point it to that one. So we didn't just want it to be a tool switch. We wanted to use this opportunity to launch a shift in mindset, a change, right? And adoption comes from good onboarding. So if you're onboarding someone to a new tool without actually allocating the time to train them on it, then that's defeating the purpose, right? And to visually showcase it a bit, and I would like to give a shout out to Hawkfry, our partners here, we used Omni itself to create the dashboards as training decks. So in hindsight, this would look as something like this. This is a dashboard within Omni, but we used it to conduct training as well. So we taught users how to create dashboards, how to create a filter, so on and so forth. Right? So once again, adoption comes from good onboarding. Finally, what were some of the main functionality that also drove us to migrate? Because we had to have some features that were in it for us as the data team, right? And some things that actually convinced us to actually get there were AI features, whether it being topic or model AI-based recommendation to help speed up build time, data observability for new users, and lower barrier to entry for end users who are not necessarily technical, such as Excel-like features. And if I had to quickly visualize some of these, this is an Excel-like feature where, for example, you can extract the domain from an email. You don't necessarily have to know how to write SQL or the respective Google Sheet functionality. And even us as data engineers find this useful, right? Because you can compile it via AI. What's interesting is that anything you're seeing here can eventually be upstreamed and converted to SQL. So you can make that natively available into the platform across other dashboards as well. There was also these workbook helpers. So if you're on a specific topic or a model and you don't know where to start, you can use LLM, and based on the metadata you have on the platform, you can get an initial version of the query and then continue building from that point onwards. A recent release that also came to Omni was Omni Chat. This is the LLM-like experience that we're all accustomed to by now. And what's interesting is that it can create queries on the fly from the multiple datasets or topics that you have. And if you want to continue building on it, you can actually continue exploring from here. So it's curated in a way that it allows you to actually build on top of that visualization, for example. So what was the outcome after this migration? For the very first time in the data team's history, from 180 users, we've experienced over 100 people and active users. We also saw a very big jump in dashboard load times. And since we're getting rid of those ad hoc requests and constant bug fixes or requests, hey, can you create this column for me and stuff like that, we're now focusing on strategic value rather on these ad hoc requests. To visualize it a bit, these were our all-time numbers on our previous BI platform. As you can see, it started falling at the end when we were phasing it out. But in the first week or two of after we started onboarding everyone, I would say this is 3 weeks in, we actually touched an all-time high of 105. So that was very nice for us to flag as the data team, because we never even saw that number on 4 years of having the previous platform, right? So what were the lessons learned for us as a data team? And if we had to do it other again, what would we do the same and what would we change, right? So first and foremost, you have to engage the whole team, or I would say the whole company. Because if a tool works for engineers or data-driven people, but it doesn't work for the end user, then that's defeating the purpose of a data-driven migration, right? And yes, don't underestimate migration complexity, because even with the best tools or having years worth of content, it's going to take some thorough planning. But hopefully with what you've seen here, I've shown you that it doesn't necessarily have to be fancy. You just need a catalog of what you actually should be migrating and what you shouldn't. And yes, overlooking is part of the process, unfortunately. So you cannot account to everything, but with very good planning, you'll be there 90–95%, right? If we had to do it again, we would send out the stakeholder audit form again. We would do a phased rollout where we would focus on the most important stuff first, and then eventually focus on the secondary stuff afterwards. And something that I didn't mention but absolutely makes sense is to not over-engineer your first couple of dashboards, because you'll have plenty of time to do that, right? But that's what our 6-phase migration roadmap was. If you're actually considering a migration, your 6-phase migration roadmap should look somewhat the same. But one curveball that I would throw you with the evolving AI needs in these last couple of months is to start thinking about the AI context layer, so that you'll make sure that you're LLM ready when the time comes, right? This is also something that Omni natively supports, and we've been testing it recently, and it's really interesting. Some final thoughts from my side. a modern BI platform is only as good as the thinking behind it. So you cannot rush into a migration, or you shouldn't even consider a migration if what you have is actually serving its need, right? But if you are at a tipping point where you are considering a migration, make sure that it's not monkey see, monkey do. Rebuild it with purpose. If you'd also like to know why we chose Omni out of the tools that were on the market at the time, we've published a non-biased blog post earlier this year from our side on why we thought it was the best tool for us at Game Lounge at the time. So feel free to scan this QR code and eventually take a look at it later. I cannot end this presentation without thanking the data team. This wasn't a one-man show, but it was a small team actually. We're a team of 8 people, and we managed to migrate 4 years worth of content in under 3 months. And if you're here, there's also Sean and Attila, my colleagues here, so if you have any questions, you can also ask them after the session. I would highly encourage you to visit Omni's booth. I think they're onto something that's great, so feel free to visit them at M30. And yes, we also partnered with Hawkfry during this migration, so I would highly recommend their services as well. Yes, if you'd like to connect with me on LinkedIn or ask specific questions after this session, please feel free to do so. That's my LinkedIn after that. And yeah, I want to thank all of you for actually attending the session. This was a very humbling turnout. I didn't expect it. So thanks a lot for actually coming by. And if there are any questions, I think we have roughly 3 to 4 minutes for doing so. Thanks a lot. Cheers. I think we have a question there.
We've got time for one question.
One question, yeah.
How did you estimate the time to build 100 dashboards in 6 weeks? I saw in your roadmap. Like, I did the calculation and it's 3 dashboards per day.
Yes.
So how did you do that? Like,
So
based on the size of the team, it was not many.
yes, that's actually correct. One way we handled it is, as I've explained, the data team is composed of 8 people. So eventually, after the data engineers, for example, were ready from most of the model or topic migration, they also lended a hand on the BI side of things. That said, yes, it was a very unrealistic target. 100 dashboards over 6-7 weeks is not a small feat, but we made sure that we had some leeway before the original deadline to make sure that we'll address that as well. Yep. Any other questions, maybe? Thanks a lot, everyone. Cheers.